largest military action of the Third Crusade, and one of the longest western sieges of the Middle Ages. It began in 1189 when an army of crusaders marched south from Tyre and erected a blockade of the coastal city of Acre. We're headed from the top of Mount Carmel. Two issues immediately frustrated the besiegers. First, they had no fleet with which to blockade the city's port, and this allowed Muslim defenders to continually replenish their supplies via the Mediterranean Sea and via the city's harbor. Second, the city was immediately secured by the army of the Kurdish general Saladin. As a result of this, the Crusaders had to assault the city while simultaneously defending themselves against his attacks. Nearly 2 years later, in 1191, the siege was still ongoing when Philip Augustus and Richard the Lionheart arrived in April and in June. Their fleets finally enabled a blockade of the city on all sides. The Crusaders eventually broke through the city walls while continuing to repel Saladin's attacks, and the siege finally ended in August with the negotiated surrender of the garrison. Now, last year, I foolishly signed a contract to write a book about the Siege of Acre. And I say foolishly because I didn't know at the time that my wife would tell me 2 weeks later that she was pregnant with our third child, which is going to make writing a little difficult in a couple months. But nonetheless, going through the research and figuring I only have this summer to get it done, I decided to count all of the activity going on at the Siege of Acre, because what struck me looking through the sources is that it's not just one siege. It is 2 years of sustained, continual military activity. It's the sort of thing that needs to be broken down into pieces, considering the different skirmishes, battles, naval activities, these sorts of things. And so what I want to do today is enumerate for you what I have found so far to be the complex military events at the Siege of Acre. So I'm going to move chronologically through each year of the siege and try to keep a running tally for you of all of these engagements that are going on. And at the end, I hope, at the very least, you'll agree with me that this was a very complex military event. And I hope even more than that, that you'll agree that it's something somebody should write a book about. So let's begin with the first year of the siege, which occurred in the last half of 1189. It began with the march of Guy of Lusignan, the king of Jerusalem, from the city of Tyre down the coastal road towards Acre, which was called the Scandalian Pass. There were 2 skirmishes as the Crusades moved south. And upon his arrival at the city, Guy established his headquarters on a hill just to the east of Acre, known as the Turan. Now, this hill has a lot of other names, which confused me for a long time. I got a local guide and figured it out. The Turan, the Tel Muslaban, the Tel Afukara, or the oldest name, Canaan. This was the capital of ancient Canaan, which I had no idea until I was standing on top of it. And when you stand and you look around, you see pottery surrounding the walkways. My guide said, "Oh, don't worry about that, it's just Hellenistic." It kind of blew me away. So he arrives on the city at the hill of Turan. Saladin soon arrived outside with his army, and in late August he attacked the Crusaders before they could fully invest the city. This was a full-scale battle, but it was also, like every other battle in front of Acre, ultimately inconclusive because neither side would move away from the city itself. Following the battle was at least 2 more skirmishes, and then a second formal battle in mid-September, during which the Muslims were able to break through the Crusader lines and establish a route to the sea and into the city via the northern neighborhood, which is called Mont Usard. Saladin himself then visited the garrison and told them to keep their chins up. More skirmishes took place, with the Muslims effectively disrupting the Crusader foraging expeditions. This is the line. If you stand on the Turan looking towards Acre today, you don't see much of the city walls, but you do see some modern shopping centers, which are very nice. Now, this might have been a decisive moment, but on either 3 or 4 October, the Crusaders launched a counterattack and drove towards Saladin's lines. Arabic sources claim that this attack was smashed, but it does also seem that some Muslim supplies were captured. There were some desertions in the army, and some of the Muslim soldiers actually looted supplies as they ran away. And Saladin's own tent was plundered. His own possessions were stolen. Afterward, Saladin became very ill and decided to pull his forces out completely. He moved south to the hill of Al-Karuba to await the arrival of reinforcements from Alexandria, as well as the forces of his brother, Safaddin. And in the meantime, since Saladin was out of the way, the Crusaders got busy. They started digging trenches around their positions and equipped these trenches with ramparts, simultaneously fighting off sorties from the Acre garrison while digging the trenches. And one starts to think about Julius Caesar in Gaul, Vercingetorix. So that's the image that came to my mind right away. But thus, if you take what's been going on in Acre in 1189, I counted at least 8 skirmishes and 3 formal battles. And these were all battles, I should stress, that the sources say with the lines formed up, they formed wings, and they marched towards each other. They were definitely set-piece affairs. So that's 1189. Now in 1190, this year began with the sinking of a Crusader supply ship off the coast, and then another formal battle, which happened in the spring in either late March or early April, depending on the sources you look at. The Crusaders had caught wind that Saladin and his soldiers were hunting and foraging in the plain around south of Acre. Organizing quickly, the Crusaders fell upon his vanguard, and fighting went on until nightfall, after which both sides returned to their camp. 2 subsequent skirmishes followed, for Saladin had been reinforced, and he used some of his surplus troops to attack the Crusader ramparts on April 23rd. These attacks were repelled, and 4 days later, the first three of the Crusaders' siege towers were finished in their construction and pushed towards the walls of the city. Seeing the siege towers, the Muslims responded in full force. Saladin ordered an attack against the defensive ramparts, while the Acre garrison fought back and managed to set those siege towers on fire with an old kind of Greek fire and supposedly a new kind of Greek fire that had just been smuggled into the city. The fighting lasted for 8 days between the city to the ramparts, until both sides got tired and retired the field. Sometime in late May or early June, a reinforcement fleet from Alexandria arrived, and the Crusader ships sailed out to attack it. Both fleets lost vessels in the action, but the Muslim supplies were ultimately able to reach the harbor of Acre and the safety there. This is on the Toron, looking out towards where Saladin's lines would have been established. On the 25th of July, the Crusaders formed lines and marched into battle against the Muslims who had arrived from Egypt and Mosul. Now, these are not led by Saladin, these are other groups of attackers. The Egyptian camp was taken, but some Muslims were able to break through to the Frankish ramparts. So both sides are winning, but then both sides ultimately withdrew because they sensed the danger. Messages were sent out to Saladin in the south, who was at Al-Quruba, saying, move your forces north. This is the moment. If you join us in a general attack, we can take this thing. Okay? Saladin hesitated. He hesitated for 2 days. He waited. And in that time, Count Henry of Champagne arrived with more men, more supplies, more equipment, and he brought a renewed vigor to the crusading army. So this was the window for Saladin, 2 days, and he wasn't able to take advantage. In August and September, Count Henry directed a series of assaults against the city, including the deployment of battering rams, trebuchets, and naval assaults against what was known as the, I'm trying to give you the orientations of the lines. You can see it. So, Iran, city, Crusader lines, Muslim lines around it. Including an assault against the so-called Tower of Flies, which is in the harbor of Acre. And if you go to Acre today and you look out, you can see the remains of the Tower of Flies. Here it is on Marino Sanudo's 13th century map, a little tower. Yes, it's very phallic, I understand that. But that's the remains there, and they're not all original to the Third Crusade. It had been sort of built up and rebuilt up and that sort of thing. That's what you see now. All of these attacks failed, every single one of them. In late September and October 1190, there were 2 or 3 naval activities off the coast. Not exactly sure how many, but Crusader ships attacked vessels from Alexandria. Muslim ships burned a German ship, possibly captured 2 other German ships. In the closing months of 1190, there were more engagements. November 11th, the combined crusading forces initiated another formal battle against the encircling forces and the garrison in Acre. They're fighting both ways deliberately. They're doing both things at once. And the results were typical. They were handled pretty easily by their opponents. Ibn al-Athir, the Arabic chronicler, claims that if Saladin had led a counterattack at that moment, again, the siege could have been broken, but unfortunately, Saladin had been stricken with what al-Athir calls colic, which my pediatrician tells me is a myth, but apparently it's in the source. But he's struck with the sickness, and so he can't launch the counterattack, and again, the Crusaders are held in place, but they are not defeated. In the days following, the Crusaders got more confident. They probed further and further past their lines, skirmishing with Muslims at the Bridge of Dok, which is over the river Balis, south of Acre, and attacking Saladin's advanced guard. This is standing on the Toron, looking towards the river Balis and towards the modern city of Haifa in the distance. On November 24th, one of the crusading leaders, and this is not a military thing that happened, Conrad, the Marquis of Montferrat, decided it would be a good time to get married. And so they had a nice wedding ceremony in the middle of the siege. He married Isabella, the half-sister of Queen Sibella of Jerusalem. Unfortunately, that marriage was not only bigamous, but it was also incestuous, because both Conrad and Isabella were already married. These are the little details. The poet Ambroise, he looks at this and uses it as a forecast. He says, this evil wedding foreshadows evil and harm. And while the wedding is going on, really the after party, which is the most fun part, there were some drunk crusaders walking around, and the Muslims actually snuck into the wedding ceremony, into the reception, and captured over 20 of these crusaders and either killed them or took them away. So be careful when you're drinking out there at the dance. Be careful on Saturday. December brought an end to the fighting. Saladin gave his army a winter reprieve, and the crusaders spent the remaining weeks plotting their next moves. So if we go back to our tally here, in 1190 we have, by my count, 5 explicit skirmishes in the sources, 4 formal battles, either 4 or 5 naval actions, and about 9 weeks, give or take, of sustained assaults against the walls of Acre. Now on New Year's Eve 1190, the Crusaders again attacked the walls of Acre in force, and I'm counting this with 1191 because it's sort of leading into the new year. They were finally able to undermine one of the walls on January 5th, which the garrison quickly patched up. It was not a hole they could exploit. But the very next week, the second week of January, a group of supply ships sailed south from Tyre, bringing food. These were intercepted by the Egyptians and taken away, and this is the moment where the Crusaders really start to feel the pain. They were running out of food. There simply was no food around. There's no food to buy. There's no food to forage because you're caught between the Muslims and the city. The sources claim they started planting seeds and herbs and sort of praying for a faster growing season than normal so they could eat them. And, unhelpfully, struck with disease at the exact same time. So this is a colossal problem. Again, great moment for the Muslims to attack and take them all, and it doesn't happen. By the time you get to the spring, skirmishes are occurring again, and the battle turns for the worse for Saladin. In April, Philip Augustus arrives, and then eventually, Richard is on his way. But it's the presence of Philip Augustus that really bothers Saladin. I'm going to argue, when I write this thing, that I'm giving credit for the victory of the siege to Philip, not to Richard. I'm going to take that position, which hopefully will be controversial. It's skewered in reviews, but I'm going for it. Because Saladin, this is when he starts to see the moment slip away. He orders his men to start making daily attacks against the ramparts. He says, I want you going there every day. We've got to break through. We have to break through. He knows that his chances are slipping away. The war at sea was going well. Ships from Beirut intercepted some ships sailing south. But Philip was able to organize, batter the walls with trebuchets. The garrison responds, but they can't stop him from attacking. The Muslims attack the ramparts again, but they still cannot break through. And John Pryor just put out a very recent article in the Ashgate collection for Bernie Backrack, where he says that basically as soon as the ramparts went up, it was over. Saladin just had no idea it was over. He keeps trying to get through, and he just never does. On June 8th, Richard the Lionheart arrives. The fanfare goes up, sound the trumpets. Acre is going down. 25 ships, a full blockade of the city. He may or may not have sunk a Muslim vessel on the way in. Crusader sources say he did in a glorious moment. Arabic sources say that the captain of the ship scuttled it himself to keep the treasure out of their hands. But once ashore, this is a more familiar tale to us. We know what Richard does. He puts together his special trebuchets. He starts battering the walls. Saladin responds in force. The garrison's fighting, but it's all to naught. And ultimately, the Crusaders are going to negotiate a surrender of the city of Acre. And that happens in August. The Cursed Tower, as it's called, on Acre's eastern edge is undermined. It falls down. And then you have a few final skirmishes and Richard's infamous execution of his Muslim prisoners. For 1191, here's my tally. 10 skirmishes, that's woefully undercounted. It's very difficult to know how many, but at least 10. 3 naval actions, 3 weeks of sustained assaults. So if we step back in our last minute and say, what are we looking at? Okay, here's the combined tally. This is what I've found so far. If I go by explicit references in the sources, 23 plus skirmishes that are named in the sources, probably far more than that. 7 formal set-piece battles, 7 to 8 naval actions off the coast, and at least 11 weeks of sustained assaults. Now, there's a number of problems with this count. I'm going to be going over it over and over in the next year. Differentiating between a skirmish and a battle can be very difficult. Counting the number of skirmishes can be very difficult. Figuring out Saladin's strategy in all of this can be very difficult. I was going back over my Clausewitz the other day, and Clausewitz says when you look at little minor actions like this, it could be minor direct damage to inflict blows and lead to victory. That could be one. Or it could be minor engagements that do not seek a decision. right? And I haven't figured out what it is yet. Is this Saladin in desperation? Is this Saladin really having a focus trying to break through? But the point of this, and I hope what the tally shows you, is that we ought not refer to this siege as just the siege of Acre that happened, Richard won, and then the crusading armies moved away. It's a continual 2-year period of constant military engagements featuring the best generals of the age, the most complex military technology available at the time. It's something that deserves further inquiry.